Dear citizens of America, experts are urging people to prepare. Continue watching to find out why. China is massively stockpiling food supplies ahead of the coming global famine. Bloomberg says that Chinese authorities are in panic mode. So far this year, they have snapped up more than half of the world's green supplies. At the same time, the United States is struggling to find alternative suppliers on the global market, and consumers are still experiencing shortages of a wide range of everyday necessities, while prices continue to reach stratospheric new highs. Even more worryingly, a new report says that America's food system could collapse like the 2008 banks, and the scenario for the next months look absolutely terrifying right now. That's what we are gonna expose today. Reports show that China, which is home to less than 20% of the world's population, has managed to stockpile more than half of the globe's grains, leading to steep price increases across the planet and pushing more countries into famine. The Chinese government's massive food panic buying spree, which started in January, hasn't slowed in recent months, and now the United States Department of Agriculture estimates that China owns 69% of the world's corn reserves, 60% of its rice, and 51% of its wheat. Since the start of the year, China has spent $98.1 billion importing food, up 4.6 times from a decade earlier. According to the General Administration of Customs of China, from January to September, the Eastern superpower has imported more food than it had since at least 2016, which is as far back as comparable data goes. Even though the country claims it's only doing that to ensure it has enough food on hand to feed its large population, something the country has struggled with historically, the data indicates otherwise. China expert and author Gordon Chang argues that the only way to describe the Chinese Communist Party's large agricultural purchases is to call it what it is: hoarding. They are hoarding, he said. They of course will never admit to something like that. Experts agree that the nation's draconian health policies can partially explain the current scramble to secure food. Many provinces are still facing hard lockdowns, and the situation has been particularly dire. For weeks, residents have been under stay-at-home mandates in an effort to curb the number of virus cases, and other areas could be next. Unfortunately, yes, lockdowns are prompting just about everybody to hoard, and it's not just in lockdown cities, said Stanley Chow, author of Selling to China. Chinese citizens are hoarding even in cities that just got out of lockdown or have no threat of lockdown. Chow revealed that his contacts are seeing people still lining up at grocery stores to buy up everything from flour, rice, meats to vegetables and baby food. Those who can afford to use grocery delivery services are ordering up to 6 weeks' worth of groceries, while others load up on meats and frozen vegetables to last up to 6 weeks without having to step foot outside to buy food, he said, describing the environment as a mass hysteria, with residents taking their cues from provinces where they're seeing people survive on minimal rations or complaining about little or no food for weeks. On the other hand, Chinese officials are telling people not to worry about facing the lockdowns, but according to Chow, the people aren't taking any chances. People are just extrapolating and saying, if it happened before, it'll happen again. On a similar note, Usha Hayer, an expert on China and food security, said the rush to hoard food supplies were sparked by people observing other cities' food rationing. Chinese citizens also know that the government will not release information to make their daily lives smoother and enable planning for daily commodities, such as food, if the information provides evidence of failed policies. For its part, the Chinese government censors were ordered to open a campaign of comment flooding to hide posts about local food shortages, according to leaked directive published by the China Digital Times. Here we have Yili, home to about 4.5 million people, and is believed to have been first put into lockdown in early August without official public announcement after a new virus outbreak. In recent days, social media has seen a surge of posts about food shortages, delays, or refusals of medical care. All these posts about yili scenery and food are coming from alternative accounts. Nice job, government. Have you ever heard of maintaining a shred of dignity? Said one Weibo user. This is really happening during the yili epidemic. The locals have tried many things to let the outside world know about our circumstances here, said another one. We're locked inside and don't have enough supplies. Yet they opened the tourist scenic areas. Help us, please help us here. Help the yili common people, the third commentator wrote. The big irony is that even as it encourages residents not to make a run on grocery stores, the government has been stockpiling massive amounts of food and other commodities. A report published by the state-controlled Economic Daily in January found that China's rice and wheat inventory can feed its people for almost 2 years, which leads us to the question of why the population of the biggest importer of food supplies of 2022 is still facing food shortages. Geopolitical strategists say the country is keeping most of its imports on its reserves in an attempt to weaponize them later as global conflicts continue to escalate. Chinese leaders who are deeply paranoid and insecure, and the best of moments are even more so now. China is keeping its strategic food stockpiles at a historically high level. Although the United States can't stop the Chinese from buying up everything, the experts said there is a possibility that the U.S. government down the line might opt to block the export of agricultural products. If China's hoarding gets out of control, U.S. authorities are getting furious with Beijing for draining the global commodity market, and they've been expressing their growing frustration with the Chinese measures in recent days. We would like to see China act like the great power that it is and provide more grain to the poor people around the world, said James O'Brien, head of the U.S. State Department's Office of Sanctions Coordinations, noting that China has been a very active buyer of grain, and it is stockpiling grain at a time when hundreds of millions of people are entering the catastrophic phase of food insecurity and facing acute shortages for months on end. O'Brien informed that 40% of grain shipments from Ukraine in April have gone to China alone. Similarly, Gordon Chang also pointed out that many developed nations that never faced difficulties to ensure international supplies before will be struggling with each other to ensure their food supply. He fears that the next geopolitical conflicts could be fought over food, and while that may be a worry for the future, it still affects the present as China's stockpiling continues to impact food prices. Prices will go up. That will be imminent and it will continue. For its part, the Chinese government is ludicrously accusing the United States as the one who is weaponizing food, since it is the U.S. that is weaponizing food and profiting from the practice. What do you think about this? Let us know in the comments below. Whether the world can avoid a food crisis next year largely depends on how cooperative the U.S. will be with the efforts of the UN and other members of the international community. That quote is from the government-controlled China Daily, but the truth is that the United States is far and away the biggest donor to the World Food Program. The idea that the U.S. is weaponizing food is simply absurd. The accusation implies that Western sanctions on Russian food exports are to blame. But in reality, Russian grain and fertilizers were only temporarily subject to U.S. or European sanctions during the months of April and May when Western allies banned Russian ships from their ports. Experts have argued that the U.S. sanction was largely symbolic, given that Russian ships carried less than 1% of the cargo arriving at U.S. ports, and apart from a ban on energy exports, no bans on food exports are in place right now. As the European Commercial President explains, Russia and China are the real food weaponizers, and their populations would end up being left to pay the price. This is a cold, callous, and calculated siege by Putin on some of the most vulnerable people in the world. She stressed, "Food has become now part of the Kremlin's arsenal of terror, and we cannot tolerate it." The China Daily spin on sanctions is in line with Kremlin disinformation, which has tried to divert attention from the costs of a conflict that has victimized tens of thousands and created ripple effects affecting economies around the entire planet. That is such an unfounded lie. That one report published by risk consultancy indicates that China is actually the one diversifying its supply of critical natural resources to shore up its ability to weaponize trade against its geopolitical rivals. If China has a soft underbelly, it is its high dependency on foreign natural resources. One way the country is diversifying its import sources is by buying stakes in overseas companies. Doing that will increase the proportion of Chinese-owned resources and the country's total imports. China is seeking to strengthen its control over global supply chains via overseas investments and partnerships with international majors. Beijing has been supporting Chinese state-owned enterprises to go global and establish control of resource bases overseas since the late 1990s. Our data shows China is pivoting towards more autocratic regimes that represent great disability for its supply lines than democracies that are or may become hostile to Beijing, but is also using its massive market as a source of diplomatic leverage. By securing diversified sources, China will be in a better position to weaponize trade with geopolitical rivals, while at the same time increasing the economic dependence of new and existing partners. While the Eastern nation continues to seize a larger share of food products from international suppliers, the United States is left scrambling to find alternative solutions, and new data shows that it's falling behind. For example, China just made the largest corn purchase since May 2021 last month, totaling 1.084 million tons. That's a 50% rise from a year ago. That number of corn imports dwarfs those of the United States, which were estimated at 57.8 million tons. The United States is now experiencing extensive corn shortages, and consumers are already being impacted. Arizona farmer John Post is warning that the entire U.S. food supply chain is being affected, given that corn is used in the production of fertilizers, animal feed, and a series of food staples we buy and consume regularly. On top of that, nearly 40% of the U.S. corn crop now goes to ethanol. The share increases every year, amplifying price pressures when the market is tight. The United States is also a major corn exporter, and due to its long-term contracts with other nations, it is forced to ship the considerable share of its corn production overseas. The farmer forecasts prices will rise from 10 to 20% this year, and we expect the corn shortage to continue throughout 2023. In the meantime, shoppers are still seeing empty shelves and prolonged shortages of everyday necessities. Different from China, U.S. social media is full of images of their supermarket aisles and signs explaining the lack of available food and other items. Stores such as Target, Costco, and Walmart have apologized to customers for the shortages. "We're really seeing the perfect storm we've been warned about," said Phil Lempert, editor of the website supermarketguru.com. "We've become really reliant on kind of that just-in-time supply chain, and I think what we are seeing is that things are just getting off track right now. From tomatoes to tampons, product stockouts in grocery stores are threatening to upend the holiday season as Americans scramble to prepare before things get worse." Even more concerningly, a recent report by The Guardian warns that America's failing food system could collapse as the banks did in 2008. The food industry is becoming tightly coupled to the financial sector, increasing what scientists call the network density of the system, making it more susceptible to cascading failure. According to one estimate, 90% of the grain trade is done by 4 major corporations. As they begin to adopt similar practices and pursue similar revenue streams, their businesses will look more and more alike, which may make a single shock to the global food system that much more catastrophic. Unexpected financial or meteorological events can upend not one, but all of their businesses leaving a huge hole in the market for necessary goods. Furthermore, in the meat industry, 4 companies alone control 84% of the beef cattle slaughter. Those companies are JBS USA, Tyson Foods, Cargill National Beef Packing Company. As they continue to push small meat producers out of the market, our meat food supply chain becomes more and more vulnerable and at risk of shortages and collapses more than ever. Small and independent farmers and ranches are being crushed by these giant corporations. Al Davis, a Nebraska cattle producer and former state senator, emphasized that farm and ranch families are facing a great extinction if we lose that rural lifestyle. We have really lost a big part of what made this country great. The scarcity of supplies we're witnessing is being caused by internal and external shocks to our fragile food system. If it collapses like the 2008 bank crisis, where are we gonna shop? If beef becomes the next baby formula, are you confident you'll have enough or that you'll be able to find it in stores? With the United Nations warning that the number of people living in famine struck all across the globe, region's top 700 million last year is shocking. 100 million increase from 5 years earlier. Experts are urging people to prepare for the coming global famine. John LeBlanc of Cedarville University offers advice on practical ways to get ready. I think people need to do 2 things. They need to stock up on foods that are not gonna spoil, canned goods, packaged goods, sell on and so forth, and anything they can get to put in the freezer. Here in the United States, about 13 million children presently are experiencing hunger, and as food prices go up, as inflation continues to increase gas prices, it all has a compound effect. Explained here, the tailor of bread for the world. With all things considered, it is clear that conditions are set to deteriorate even further. Throughout history, food shortages have triggered popular unrest. They served as a contributing factor to uprisings that have brought down entire societies, and as we face food uncertainties, due to factors such as our deteriorating relations with other major economic superpowers, the risk of disaster is real, and the consequences are gonna be catastrophic for all of us. Thank you for watching, and be sure to subscribe.